The dust over Black Fang Canyon was so thick it looked as though the devil himself had decided to beat his old carpets. The sun hung above the prairie like a red-hot copper plate, scorching the last remnants of green and turning the dry grass into brittle wire. Old Thomas Silver, known in these parts as Steel Rains, sat on the porch of his sagging ranch house, whetting a long skinning knife. Every motion of his wiry, liver-spotted hands was like the ticking of a tower clock, measured, ruthless, refined by 60 years of harsh life in Texas. Beside him on the dusty ground lay a year-and-a-half-old Mustang colt, wild, slate gray as a stormy sky, with a frantic white film over his left eye. The colt breathed heavily but did not fight. Old Tom's hand rested on its withered ridge, not pressing down, but merely radiating a dry, steady warmth. Young Luke, Tom's nephew, galloped up to the porch. Luke tumbled out of his saddle, nearly falling into the dirt. He was 22. His hat was pushed to the back of his head. His face burned with rage and heat, and curse after curse spilled from his lips. "I'm going to shoot her, Uncle Tom. By God, I'll shoot her, or I'm riding off to Colorado to dig for gold. I've had enough." Luke slammed his leather reins onto the porch floorboards. Mary locked the door again. "She threw my dinner to the hogs just because I was 10 minutes late tracking down a stray calf. And when I tried to kick the door in with my spur, she dumped a bucket of slops on my head from the second-floor window." Old Tom didn't even look up. The knife let out a long, singing rasp. "Shh, shh. Slops are good for the complexion, Luke," the old man said quietly. "At your age, a man's face is always too hot anyway. Good to cool it off. Are you laughing at me?" Luke threw his hands up, his boots and spurs clattering against the dry planks. "Remember the advice you gave me 3 months ago? Tame a horse with kindness, Luke." I remembered those words like gospel, and I applied them. "And how are things going with the horses?" Tom nodded toward the gray colt. "The gray walks behind me like a hound dog now. He takes sugar right out of my palm and lets me shoe his hind hooves without a twitch." "You were right, Uncle. Kindness, a soft voice, green grass, and patience turn a wild Mustang into a loyal friend." Luke took a step forward, leaning over the old man, his voice dropping to a raspy whisper. "But when I used that same method on Mary, when I brought her an armful of wild asters, when I tried to stroke her hair and speak to her gently after she smashed my favorite stoneware mug, do you know what she did? She told me I was treating her like a simple-minded mare and launched a cast-iron skillet straight at my head." Tom stopped the whetstone. For the first time all afternoon, he raised his eyes gray, faded by the prairie sun, deeper than dry wells in July. "I gave you advice about horses, lad," Tom said, his voice sounding like dry branches snapping under a boot. "I didn't get a chance to say anything about women. You galloped off to your wedding before I even had time to knock the ashes out of my pipe." Luke froze. "What didn't you get a chance to tell me?" Tom stood up, slid the knife into the leather sheath on his belt, and slapped his knees. "Swing into your saddle. We're riding out to old McGregor's over at Bloody Cypress. Along the way, I'll tell you a story an old Comanche chief told me when we were sharing our last canteen of water under the scorching sun back in the 80s. If you grasp it, you'll come back home a man. If you don't, you can ride straight on to Colorado. Mary will just find herself someone with a brain larger than a walnut anyway." They rode in silence for the first 3 miles. The prairie stretched in every direction, an endless ocean of yellow feather grass, where solitary yuccas stuck up like the spears of forgotten armies. The air shivered with heat. The crickets chirped so furiously, it felt as though the entire earth were one giant, wound-up mechanism ready to burst at any second. "So," old Tom began, once they cleared Dry Creek, "back in the 40s, when these lands weren't even drawn on Washington's maps yet, there lived a man named Caleb Ross. They called him Wild Caleb. He could break a 5-year-old stallion in half an hour without a saddle or bridle, using nothing but a length of rope and his own pure fury. He was a mountain of a man, with fists the size of melons and a temper that made a Gulf storm look like a gentle breeze. Caleb believed everything in this world bowed to force. He broke horses, he broke oxen, he broke stubborn trail partners. If a tree stood in the way of his plow, he didn't steer around it. He ripped it out by the roots with his bare hands, straining his muscles till they nearly burst. And he broke horses the same way. A whip, a heavy boot, and iron in the mouth. But you told me yourself that a horse ought to be tamed with kindness. Luke interrupted. Listen further, hothead, Tom said sternly. Caleb thought he knew how the world worked. But one day, he rode off to St. Louis for supplies and didn't come back alone. He brought back a girl named Eleonora. She was the daughter of a Boston schoolmaster, fragile, with fingers that had never held anything heavier than a silver spoon, and eyes as green as the first hazel leaves in spring. Everyone at the fort said, Caleb will ruin her in a month. He'll grind her into dust just like he grinds his horses. But Caleb changed overnight. He fell in love with her, the way only savages who have never known tenderness fall in love. And that's right where Caleb made the exact same mistake you made, Luke. What mistake? He decided a woman is a crystal vase or a rare bird that you either have to break or keep in a gilded cage, feeding her sweet crumbs out of your hand. He started acting around her as if she were made of dry clay that would crumble at every loud word. He wouldn't let her take a step on her own. He knelt before her. He carried her in his arms across every puddle, and he stayed dead silent when she, sick with longing for home, smashed crockery against the wall and cursed this damned, flea-bitten, God-forsaken wilderness. And what's so bad about that? Luke protested. He was showing respect. He was being a gentleman. He wasn't being a gentleman, Luke. He was being a coward, Tom cut in. He was terrified of her feelings. He was terrified of her anger. He thought if he showed her his true strength, not animal rage, but the strength of his spirit, his truth, she would stop loving him and leave. He babied her like a spoiled foal that gets a lump of sugar every time it kicks the barn door. And did Eleonora know what to do with all that sweet indulgence? No. On the prairie, kindness without boundaries is taken for weakness. If you give a horse sugar when it bites your shoulder, it'll decide it's the leader of the herd. Eleonora began to wither and fly into rages all at once. She'd weep for days on end, then throw tantrums so fierce even the Indian scouts gave Ross's ranch a 3-mile berth. Caleb endured it all, smiled, brought her new silk ribbons from town, and whispered sweet nothings. He shrank smaller and smaller before her, while her misery and anger grew larger by the day. And how did it end? With smallpox and Indians? Tom answered dryly, but first with a fatal day. Red Jack's gang hit the ranch. Caleb was out in the corral at the time. Only Eleonora was inside the house. Caleb could have picked off 2 of them with his Winchester right then and there, but he panicked, thinking the gunfire and breaking down the door would frighten his delicate blossom. So he started negotiating with the bandits. He offered them horses, money, anything, if they'd just not scare his wife. The bandits laughed in his face. They realized the giant standing before them was a hollow shell wrapped in fear for his woman. Eleonora saw the whole thing from the window. She saw her huge, powerful husband, a man who could drop a bull with one blow, humiliating himself and groveling before snakes in filthy ponchos just to keep her undisturbed. And do you know what she did? What? Luke leaned forward in his saddle. She walked out onto the porch herself. She took his 10-gauge double-barrel shotgun, the very one Caleb had forbidden her to touch lest she dislocate her shoulder from the recoil, and emptied both barrels straight into the gang leader. The kick knocked her off her feet, broke her collarbone, and left a terrible bruise across her face. But the bandits scattered. When Caleb ran up to her weeping, trying to lift her and whispering, "Oh, my Lily, my angel, forgive me," she looked at him with such hatred and contempt as he'd never seen even in a wild Mustang. She spat blood from her cracked lip right into his face and said, "I married a man, Caleb, but I ended up living with a sugar vending coward." She left on the very next stagecoach back to Boston. She wore that broken collarbone like a trophy and treated Caleb like empty air. As for Caleb, Caleb took to the bottle, burned his own house to the ground, and vanished somewhere up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They turned into the canyon. The shadows of the towering red cliffs blanketed them in coolness, but the relief was deceiving. The air in the gorge was stagnant, thick with the smell of sun-baked rock and wild sage. Luke remained quiet for a while, digesting what he had heard. The horse's hooves clicked rhythmically against the gravel. "So," Luke began cautiously, "are you saying a man shouldn't show a woman pity at all? That she needs to be kept in line with an iron fist? Like it says in the Bible, 'And let the wife see that she fears her husband'?" Old Tom gave a quiet laugh. It sounded like gravel crunching under the wheel of a stagecoach. "Ah, Luke, what a mess you've got in your head. If you think the only alternative to sugary foolishness is cruelty, you're no better than Caleb. Let me tell you about another man I knew in these parts, Captain Evans. Now he thought exactly the way you just spoke. He believed a woman was an unbroken filly that needed to be broken within the first week of marriage. He brought his wife Sarah Beth all the way from Tennessee. On her very first day, when she voiced her distress that the cabin had no wooden floor, only packed dirt, Evans tied her favorite spaniel to a post and whipped it before her eyes, saying, "In this house, order is kept through discipline. Anyone who whines gets the lash." "Merciful God," Luke whispered. Sarah Beth fell silent. She never complained again. She cooked his meals, washed his shirts, cleaned the house. She became as quiet as a shadow under a boulder. Evans was proud of himself. He'd strut into the saloons and lecture the young men. "Keep a woman so she fears your very glare. That's how you get peace in the house. But here's the rub, Luke. A horse you break with a whip and fear will pull your wagon. It'll walk with its head low. But when you fall asleep by the campfire and a wolf slips out of the brush, that horse won't whinny to warn you. It'll quietly step aside and let the wolf tear your throat out, because there's nothing left in its heart but cold, dry hatred." And when Evans caught inflammation of the bowels 30 miles from the nearest doctor in the dead of winter during a blizzard, Sarah Beth didn't go harness the horses. She just sat by his bed. She watched him writhe in agony for 3 whole days. He begged her to ride for the doctor. He wept. He promised her all the gold in California. But she just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at him with empty, dead eyes. And when he drew his last breath, she stood up, put on her finest dress, locked the cabin from the outside, and walked to the way station on foot. She didn't even look back. Tom reined his horse to a stop and turned to his nephew. "Fear doesn't breed loyalty, Luke. Fear only breeds patient executioners who sit back and wait for you to stumble." The sun sank toward the west, igniting the sky in a massive blaze. Red, purple, and fiery gold ribbons divided the heavens over Texas. They emerged from the canyon onto a high ridge overlooking the entire valley. "So where is the truth, Uncle Tom?" Luke cried out in desperation. "You say kindness doesn't work because it turns a man into a rag and a woman into a spoiled tyrant. You say force and fear don't work because they kill the soul and breed hatred. Then what does?" Old Tom dismounted. He led his old, scarred gelding to a solitary oak tree, unbuckled his canteen, and took a deep draught. "A horse is an animal, Luke," Tom said quietly and weightily. "A horse lives on instinct. It searches for a leader to provide safety and feed. If the leader is calm and firm, the horse surrenders its will. That's why you tame a horse with kindness matched with unyielding firmness. You give it sugar, but you don't let it step on your foot. You stroke it, but you hold the reins. And a woman? And a woman, Luke." Tom looked the young man square in the eyes. "A woman is not an animal. And she will never surrender her will to you just because you pat her head or bring her wildflowers when she's furious. And she certainly won't respect a man who tries to break her will by force. Tom walked over to Luke, laid a heavy, calloused hand on his knee, and said, "Tame a horse with kindness, but win a wife with the truth and respect for her strength." Luke blinked, not quite understanding. The truth? Respect for her strength? But Mary, she's just a woman. "She's fragile," she cries over a burnt pie. "She is not just a woman, you fool," Tom said softly, yet relentlessly. "She is a human being who gave up a comfortable home in St. Louis and rode out with you, a penniless idiot, into this dry wilderness where any day could be your last. She came with you to a place with no curtains, where you have to haul water half a mile from a well, where rattlesnakes crawl under the porch, and stagecoaches get held up twice a week. And you think she's fragile?" Tom gave Luke's knee a firm shake. "When Mary throws slops at you, she doesn't do it out of malice. She does it because she sees you playing at being master of the ranch. You show up whenever you feel like it, making excuses about a stray calf, and then you expect to come home, baby her like a child, or smother her with kisses, thinking a few sweet words will make up for your total disregard for her labor. She cooked that meal in 100-degree heat over a roaring stove. She was waiting for you. Her work is her contribution to your survival, and you treated it like something owed to you, and her anger like the whim of a wild filly." Luke lowered his head. His defiant anger evaporated, replaced by deep shame. "What does it mean to win a wife with the truth, Uncle Tom?" he asked quietly. "It means to stop lying to yourself and to her," the old man answered, mounting his horse once more. "It means when you're in the wrong, you don't hand her asters with the foolish smile of a lion tamer. You walk up, look her straight in the eye, and say, 'Mary, I was wrong. I was late because I mismanaged my time. I left you waiting by a hot stove. I disrespected your hard work, and when you got rightfully angry, I acted like a drunk Boston bully. I would have kicked the door down if you hadn't stopped me with that bucket, and you were right. I deserved every drop of those slops. That is the truth. And respect for her strength means recognizing that she is your equal partner in this harsh land. Not your servant, not your horse, not your delicate flower. If she gets angry, don't fear her anger, and don't try to smother it with sugar. Listen to her. Receive her anger as the anger of an equal. Allow her to be strong. Allow her to have a say in how you build your life together. If she thinks you're running things poorly, sit down at the table with her and figure out how to do better, instead of kicking the door in with your spurs. When you try to tame a wife with sweetness," Tom continued, turning his horse back toward the house, "you demean her, condescending to her like a child. When you use force, you destroy her. But when you bring her your truth, your honesty, your willingness to own your faults, your commitment to protect her and respect her mind, she doesn't become tamed. She becomes your fortress." The sun had already dropped below the horizon, leaving behind a deep, velvet blue evening dotted with the first bright stars. The old man and the youth rode back toward Luke's ranch in silence. They pulled up to the small log cabin. A warm, yellow light from an oil lamp glowed in the window. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney. Mary, despite everything, had lit the stove for supper. On the porch sat the empty slop bucket. Luke left his horse at the hitching post and stood frozen before the steps. His heart was hammering in his throat faster than when he had first come face to face with a wild cougar in the canyon. Old Tom stayed in his saddle beneath the shadow of the trees, watching his nephew. Luke slowly climbed the steps. He didn't kick the door with his spur. He didn't pull a wild flower out from his shirt to buy off her anger. He simply knocked 3 times, calm and steady. The door swung open. Mary stood on the threshold. Her apron was smudged with soot. Strands of hair had slipped from her bun, and her green eyes looked at him with caution, weariness, and a buried ache. She held a wooden spoon in her hand like a weapon. "What do you want?" she asked in a dry, ringing voice. "Brought more of your sweet little tales? Or are you going to break the latch?" Luke looked at her. For the first time in all these months, he saw not just his young wife, but a human being standing alone against this vast, alien, and unforgiving wilderness. He saw the smudge of soot on her cheek, the calluses on her slender fingers, the fear and the faint ray of hope deep within her eyes. Luke took off his hat and lowered it. "Mary," he said, his voice no longer shaking, devoid of childish resentment or fake sweetness. "I was a fool. I was late because I didn't plan my time. I left you waiting by a scorching stove. I treated your hard work with disrespect, and when you got rightfully angry, I acted like a drunk Boston bully. I would have kicked that door down if you hadn't stopped me with that bucket, and you were right to do it. I earned those slops." Mary froze. The wooden spoon in her hand slowly lowered. She stared at him, as if seeing him for the very first time. "I'm not asking you to set the table for me right now," Luke continued, taking a step forward and stopping at the threshold between light and shadow. "I just want to tell you that I see how hard it is for you here, and I know you gave up everything to come out here with me, and I promise you, from this day on, I won't treat you like a little girl you give a piece of candy to so she stops crying. I'll treat you as my equal, the only person I want to walk this land with to the very end. Forgive me if you can." Silence hung in the air. The crickets struck up their endless song. Mary was quiet for a long moment. Then she slowly raised her hand, wiped the soot from her cheek with the back of her wrist, and Luke saw tears glisten in her eyes. But they were not tears of weakness. "Do you?" Mary swallowed the lump in her throat. "Do you really mean that, Luke?" "I do," he said firmly. "It's the truth. And the truth is something you don't hide on this land." Mary stepped back into the warmth of the cabin and turned up the lamp wick. "Dinner burned," she said softly, but the metallic edge was gone from her voice, replaced by a deep, dry warmth, like the earth after a long-awaited rain. "But there's cold salt pork and fresh bread. Come inside." "Wipe your boots, Luke. You're covered in dust." Luke turned back toward the shadow beneath the oak tree. Old Tom Silver sat in his saddle, barely visible in the dark. He touched the brim of his weathered hat in a quiet salute, turned his horse around, and rode silently off into the prairie, leaving the young couple alone with their truth. And above the plains, the moon was rising huge, silver, and clear. It cast its light over this rugged frontier of the Wild West, where wild horses are tamed with kindness, where iron men break mountains, but where true love and enduring homes are built upon a single foundation capable of weathering any storm. Honest truth and mutual respect between equals before the endless prairie.